Welcome to the Architect of Resilience podcast, where we explore the secrets of overcoming life's challenges and unlocking unstoppable strength through deep personal conversations and expert insights.
In this episode of the Architect of Resilience, we dive into the subconscious coding that controls your behavior, your emotions, and even your success, and how to rewire it with none other than Bizzie Gold. Bizzie is the creator of the break method, a structured, data-driven approach to emotional rewiring that has helped thousands of people rapidly disrupt mental patterns and take control of their inner dialogue. She's a sought-after educator and author of The Mind is a Filthy Liar. Bizzie works at the intersection of trauma, science, resilience, and radical self-accountability. She's not afraid to challenge the therapy status quo, and in this conversation, she delivers a clear and unapologetic breakdown of how to reclaim control over your mind and your life. Specifically in this episode, we get into what does it mean when your brain is lying to you and how you can prove it to yourself, why high performers often succeed externally while silently suffering internally, and how to identify your self-deception profile. The 9-pattern framework behind the break method and how Bizzie uses over 200 historical data points to map subconscious behavior like a blueprint. Why therapy can keep people stuck and how to break the emotional codependence many treatment models create. Bizzie's personal story of growing up with a parent with borderline personality disorder and how Fight Club, mushrooms, and trauma rewrote her worldview at 13. The hidden link between founders, emotional dysregulation, and intimacy breakdown, and how to fix it without burning everything to the ground. Plus, how peptides help Bizzie completely reverse symptoms from autoimmune disease, lupus, and Hashimoto's, and what she believes people are missing when they write off advanced therapies as just for weight loss. So this episode is packed with honesty, insight, and immediately useful tools for mental, emotional, and physical resilience. So if you are driven, ambitious, and also wondering why you're still self-sabotaging, this one is for you. Welcome to another episode of the Architect of Resilience podcast, coming to you with our sponsors, Barefoot Shoes, Build Fast Formula, and you may not be aware, but the Enhanced Executive Peptides. So go check that out. You can find everything on chrisduffin.com as well. So I am really excited today to be talking to Bizzie Gold. She just had a book come out in June. Brain is a Filthy Liar. What do you mean the brain is a filthy liar?
Every person experiences a unique pattern of self-deception that is generated from early childhood inputs. And these self-deceptive patterns tend to reinforce, excuse, and justify why we think we're right, why we think our actions are the right actions to take. And instead of making our lives better, they're often responsible for making our lives more chaotic and conflict prone. And when we can understand how our brain is deceiving us in that very patterned way, we can break free of it and we can become much more flexible and dynamic. We can build emotional resilience and we can really get everything we want in our lives without conflict and chaos.
So this sounds like it's running on the realms of, therapy, coaching. Where does it differ from the traditional methods?
So break method is entirely data driven. So while it's therapy adjacent, it very much is in direct opposition with a lot of the paradigms that are operating within the traditional mental health space. In the traditional mental health space, everything is predominantly based off of two things. Observation of the therapist, which of course anyone that understands human beings, it's impossible to completely eradicate subjectivity when there's a human being observing through their own lens, their own bias, their own experience, and then trying to populate those details into categories. And we all know those categories to be things like labels or things like in the DSM would decide whether somebody has this disorder or that disorder. So that's problem number one is the filter of subjective observation. The other problem is that the only other source of information typically that you have for mental health diagnosis is the client's self-reporting, which effectively suffers the same problem. How does the client know where their self-deceptive tendencies are? Often a client feels completely justified doing the things that they do. That's part of the reason that they're likely in therapy in the first place. So effectively, they can't see what they can't see yet. So we can't expect them to be able to accurately describe the underpinnings or the underlying mechanisms that are driving the behavior. Break method has kind of flipped both of these things on their head, because break method uses 200 historical data points in aggregate scores to accurately predict patterns of thought, behavior, and decision. So it removes both of those subjective filters, and it actually helps both client and therapist, or whoever is actually facilitating the work, to understand not just what a client's reporting, but what the underlying self-deceptions are and underlying mechanisms are that may be surrounding the client self-report, so that you're having another layer of understanding. So effectively, you can see through the client self-report in a way that's more accurate, rather than just having to rely on only what they're telling you. Because like I said, people often don't know what they don't know. And this is one of the reasons why examples of certain types of personality disorders, most people around them would be like, this person fits all the parameters for X. And then they'd be like, no, I don't. What are you talking about? Because you can't see your way out of it. You effectively can only see what you can see. And when we experience these early childhood repetitive inputs, it's as if we were putting on a lens of glass prescription. And we've spent so much time of our lives living with those glasses on that we no longer can tell that we're wearing glasses. So we don't know what distortions in the lens, and we don't yet know how to take them off. And that's precisely what we do in break method, is we understand all of the data inputs that generated the outputs of that distorted lens, so that you can learn how to correct it, take the glasses off, and learn how to have far more dynamic range. And also, as a byproduct, much more empathy for the people around you, because you realize that we're all just a damn mess and we're all broken in our own way. Levels the playing field a bit.
Yes, that is definitely, seems to come with age, you realizing everybody is just as fucked up.
Mm-hmm. Although some people with age, in my experience, they get worse. So some people's patterns, well, no, I'll back up. Everyone's pattern, if left unchecked, does get worse over time, because it's like a rut in a road. The more you drop into that rut, the deeper it gets, the deeper it gets. So I typically in my work call this the paradox of socio-emotional maturity. In a lot of ways, we were more socio-emotionally mature when we were little kids, before we actually hardened our hearts, before we stopped actually even trying to commit to things, before we got stuck in our head. So we actually go through this process where many of us actually devolve rather than go the way we would think you should go as you age. But I think, to your point, if somebody has openness and they are looking for solutions, and they do try to hold themselves to a high level of personal accountability, with every year that goes by, they should actually oppose that pattern, right? They should learn more emotional regulation techniques. They should learn to see more of their blind spots. But for the average person, this rut continues to get deeper, and their blind spots get, unfortunately, more pronounced rather than less pronounced.
For peptides, check out shop.enhancedexecutive.com. That's me, not some third party I'm recommending. This is my venture and what I'm doing. Me personally managing the supply chains and labs that I've used over the last 10 years. And you can see the third party testing that I am doing, the lot control, all of that. Go check it out. Or you can go to chrisduffin.com and see all the things that I'm involved with, from ebooks on all the topics that we're talking about, our brand of PMF mat, the Zen Oro, or Build Fast Formula supplements, barefoot shoes, the Kratos flywheel, BFR bands, our red light partner, all that on chrisduffin.com, as well as links to coaching and the enhanced executive peptides.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from there with that statement, especially thinking about the average person, because I'm thinking and reflecting on those, few people that do make the chase, the effort over the decades to do that work on themselves and challenge themselves to be better. As those are in the minority, that people actually drive change, and they're a different person at 30, 40, 50, and they're continuing to improve and recognize their faults, where they can do better. And in that process, I find that you find so much empathy for others, where when you're younger, you may not like, that person's this person's that, like, I don't want, and you really do learn empathy with the more work that you do on yourself.
Totally agree.
So how do you have people break these patterns?
Well, break method as a methodology to rewire takes about 4 months. So average length in the program is about 20 to 24 weeks, start to finish. So typically that first step would be to do the actual brain pattern diagnostic session, which takes about 20 minutes for anybody to complete at home. Then that would actually go into the algorithm. It would accurately predict where you are on the brain pattern spectrum, and that's going to track 9 different markers. 2 of those markers are going to determine how you have that unique distortion and how you perceive reality, which will actually inform everything else because it's effectively functioning like a funnel. So how you perceive things is going to dictate how you label them, with the conclusions that you make about how you've labeled them. So all of that's going to kind of squeeze down and very much control how you think, feel, behave, emote, etc. So those top 2 are perception of reality. Then there are 3 markers that we track: a transitional emotional addiction cycle, so kind of early stage transitional, late stage emotional responses, and then similarly a 4-part behavior cycle with early stage transitional and late stage behavior. And we help you understand how that all functions in a system. One generates the other. So it's very much like a baton passing effect. So you can't really separate out the 9. The 9 all really function as a unit. Once you do that part, if you decide to actually go into the rewiring program as a whole, you have 6 very structured sessions that you would go through over the course of 4 months, all while actually watching video content. A lot of people tell me that it is essentially like going back to university, but the focal point of your study is yourself. So there's a lot of work to be done because the whole goal of my program is sustainability, effectiveness, and efficiency. So for something to be sustainable, I can't just do it for you. I have to teach you how to do what I'm doing so that you can continue to do it for yourself, because Break Method is really built to question what I think has become the status quo in the mental health field of needing prolonged coaching or assistance, where you create kind of an emotionally and financially codependent container where the person is kind of dependent on you for their finances. So they're helping you enough, but just so that you can keep coming back next week and next week. We really tried to, again, flip that on its head and make sure that people get in, they get out, and then they don't ever need us again other than to give us a high five and tell us how great they're doing.
What kind of response are you getting from, that realm?
Response in terms of effectiveness, like results?
I'm just going like kickback maybe from, traditional mental health. Are you getting people embracing it, using it?
Yeah, we train therapists and psychiatrists and medical doctors all the time. I think, as with anything, when you're initially an outsider, there's pushback. And then when they can't get rid of you, then they come to you wanting to get trained. And because I've been at this for about 12 years, the first maybe 3 years were kind of the get away from us, you're an outsider. And then perhaps the middle 4 or 5 years, it was a mixed bag. And now it's kind of skewed the other direction, where now we're widely accepted. We're in the midst of, having that peer-reviewed study published. I've been invited to teach this in correctional facilities and therapeutic residential programs. So I think, as with anything, when you're disrupting in the beginning stages, people hate you. And then eventually when they realize there's value to the work that you're bringing and they're not going to get rid of you, eventually the guard comes down and they start to accept the paradigm shift, which is, I think, where we're at right now.
Nice. Where did this come from?
Well, I think, as with any truly innovative idea that doesn't actually squeeze through the filter of big academia, there always ends up being some sort of spiritual component to it that you can't really quite describe. It would be like, the lightning bolt moment where you can't explain why you had the idea, but essentially, for all intents and purposes, you were struck by the bolt of lightning and it all made sense in an instant. And that was certainly the case for me, but I would say less so one instance and more a series of instances where I started to pull this thread. And I do think that my early childhood experience, which I do talk about in the book, certainly framed this up for me. I grew up with a mother that had borderline personality disorder. And if anyone's ever grown up with somebody like that or been around somebody like that, it takes the experience of gaslighting to a whole next level. So for all intents and purposes, my whole childhood, I basically felt like I was being punked all the time because my perspective of reality was constantly clashing with what my mom was telling me had happened. And then I'd talk to my sister, and my sister and I would be uniform, and then we'd kind of be like, well, who's crazy, my mom or us? You know, it's like, they can't all be true. So I had that experience growing up. And at the beginning of the book, I tell a story about how I was at boarding school. I went to a school for competitive skiers and snowboarders when I was 13 in Colorado. And I had tried mushrooms for the first time, psilocybin mushrooms, which, you know, for anyone listening, yes, 13 was a bit early, but I was thrust into a high school environment and I kind of was like, well, why not? So I did that. And if anyone's ever done that before, you have this very neuroplastic state that you're in for, you know, hours and days afterward, where you're in a little bit of a twilight in between. And it just so happened that I was invited to go watch the movie Fight Club at the movie theater when it first came out. Have you ever seen Fight Club?
Oh, yeah.
So I'm watching the final scenes, and obviously the movie was wildly uncomfortable. Just having tripped mushrooms a few days prior, I felt like my whole reality was melting. But then you get to the final scene and you realize, like, oh my God, plot twist, they're the same person. And I just had this instantaneous empathy for my mom, because it was the first time I really even considered that somebody who was mentally ill may genuinely have no idea that they're mentally ill, that they could be living in such a false delusion of reality that they have no clue. And I immediately felt empathy for her. I was able to let go of 13 years of inner rage and turmoil, but also it set me off on a mission to try to figure out what causes self-deception and how can self-deception be so profound that some people can't spot the difference. They can't discern the line between their projected reality in their mind versus objective reality that we would all experience. So that to me was kind of the first thing that set me off on that mission. But throughout all of those twists and turns, I ended up turning to hypnotherapy, and I trained under somebody named Dolores Cannon for a while earlier on in my career. She passed away, I believe, in 2018 or 2019. And while I didn't continue on with hypnotherapy per se, her particular style was very focused on how to interact with and engage the subconscious. So I do feel like that was something that kind of sparked for me. And instead of truly wanting to pursue her method over the years, it really just helped me understand through the kind of, you know, rapid exposures to clients and being in that sort of liminal space, that there is this very unique quality that the subconscious has, that there is a very clear architecture for how the layers of memory encoding work in the subconscious, and that there is a distinct voice, if you will, that every person's subconscious had. And it just immediately piqued my curiosity. And I knew that there was something more to that realm that I wanted to continue to explore. And it wasn't until 2014 when I was having an argument with somebody, and in trying to prove my point, I started to see all these diagrams in my mind. So I was drawing these diagrams to try to prove my point to this person that I was arguing with. And then I started to think to myself, like, where did that just come from? Like, who just sees diagrams? That's so strange. But from that point, it literally was like, you know, turning on a faucet where there's like a trickle of water. But as soon as I started to kind of turn the faucet on more, what ended up flooding out was something that over 12 years eventually became Break Method. It became the algorithm and the tech platform that we use. And I will say, I think somewhat from a spiritual perspective, there's like the right accumulated knowledge with the right place at the right time, and all of those kind of work together to bring about real innovation and change. And I think if you take kind of the petri dish of my early childhood environment, where because of my mom's erratic behavior, I had to become very good at pattern recognition, that's something that I have carried forward with me as both a skill and a tool that I think once I got access to this information, however it came through, I was able to use it to such a high level that even when we brought in tech firms at a later point in time, probably in about 2022, to scan through basically the system that I had created and scan through all of our records and essentially prove on the data side the effectiveness of the predictive model that I created, it took the computer systems about a week to try to draw out all the nodal maps. And when I got on that session, basically they all looked at me and they're like, we don't know how you did this because it's so complex that it took a week of computing to map all the nodal maps, but it all checks out. And like, are you an alien was basically the response that I got. So that's effectively where it came from. But I think it's, largely there's that kind of lightning bolt spirit thing that you can't really quite explain using concrete terms, but also acquired knowledge and a personal passion that just kept pursuing it and kept refining it until it became what it is today.
Awesome. So on this podcast, I have a lot of our listeners are high performers. They're executives, they're athletes, or they're coaches within that realm. So I'd like to talk a little bit around high performers. And sometimes you see, people that you would expect to have a lot of emotional consistency or regulation because of the success that they have seen in their career, but they may not necessarily demonstrate that. Do you see that? And is there any reason behind that?
So yeah, my work essentially gets plotted out on a spectrum that we just call the brain pattern spectrum. So it's divided in left and right halves. If you kind of were to envision an XY axis with equal left and right sides, there are two clusters where high performers and entrepreneurs tend to exist. And it's a very, very small number of the total global population. So they're very specific clusters that actually have similarities in common with each other, but ultimately what drives their perception of reality is very contrasted. So examples would be the people on the left middle side. Those are typically people that have high levels of empathy. They have a really high level of risk tolerance. So they're much more likely to go in toward the fear, in toward the danger, even in some cases impulsively, but backed up by a high level of self-trust and self-efficacy. So they're not going to run into the danger and then freeze and not know what to do about it. They're going to run toward the danger. And that's actually where they generate their best creativity, their most innovative ideas. So they're going to get there, but believe at a deep core level that they're going to figure it out as they go along. So those might be people that, for example, they know how to regulate themselves. Maybe personally, they're more visionary. Typically this would be kind of more of that sort of founder persona. But if something tries to derail them, or they then have to get into the world of managing employee issues, that's where they may appear to be more emotionally dysregulated. But that's, if you take that same person and you put them in other environments, they could equally demonstrate very high levels of emotional intelligence and emotional maturity. So what ends up making the distinction is the perception of urgency. So essentially, let's say you're trying to deal with like infighting in your employees. You might actually read as very cold or matter of fact or emotionally dysregulated, because in your mind, it's like, I shouldn't have to deal with this shit. Like this is like this, I have to deal with these other really important things. So then it's like situational dependent. If it's a situation like that, they're likely to probably look like a mess. But then when there's these very high stress situations, or maybe something happens, on social media, or there's been a cancellation attempt, all of a sudden they're like calm, clear, it's fine, we're going to do this, problem solving. So the distinction is what feels like a priority or urgency and how closely matched that is to what they feel their purpose is. So that's going to be kind of more that left side person. So again, this is why I think some founders, depending on who you're talking to, people love them or hate them, but there's really nothing in between. And I think it's because you get this kind of dichotomy, and it really just depends on, are you standing in my way, or are you on my team helping me push this goal forward? And if you're helping me push this goal forward, you're going to get a high level of emotional intelligence and empathy from me. But if you're standing in my way, off with your head. I've got other things to do and take care of. And in essence, that same left side spectrum person, they likely have put themselves in a situation where many people are either financially or emotionally dependent on them. So when they're kind of in that state of urgency, like, I don't have time for this right now, if there was an inner monologue, it's like, these other people's careers depend on me getting this done right now, so out of my way. So I think in those moments, it would be easy for somebody maybe that's an employee bearing the brunt of that emotion to think that that person was a narcissist, while simultaneously that person's brain pattern type could never actually be narcissistic, because they're actually overdoing it for everybody else, and they're putting that sort of like self-sacrificial lens on everything that they do. So for that reason, I think a lot of high performers and high achievers are actually wildly misunderstood by people that are not like them, which is why I think when you get people like that in a group, like a mastermind or in a coaching environment, they're like, oh, thank God you get me, because they are very misunderstood because of what I just described. It's confusing to somebody who doesn't operate like that.
that you just articulated that so incredibly clearly and concisely. Oh my God, that picture was beautiful.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So
I've
now
been in executive roles for like 30 years and founded 7 different companies at this point. So yeah, I'm like, you're just, just tell you your story, Tom. I'm like, wow, that's all the goods, the bads. Like that's where it all, yep. That.
Well, and then the other piece of that for the left side high performers, intimate relationships can be a bit of a stumbling block. So that doesn't mean that you can't have great relationships, right? Like I'm married, I love my husband more than anything. I have 4 kids, but intimate relationships will prove more challenging than driving after a business goal in general, across the board. There's more nuance to it. And in general, the same thing that can make you kind of tough and resilient, that doesn't always translate well into the intimate relationship space. You know, like I tell this a lot, but I think it's a great example. My husband's very opposite of me. And if we get into a fight or, you know, a scuffle over something, when it's done, like I can put my head on the pillow and I can go right to sleep. No problem. Like if something's done, it's done and I've moved on. I'm not going to linger. I'm not going to ruminate on something. And there have been times that he's woken me up from sleep. Like, how could you sleep right now? And I'm like, because I'm the exact opposite of you. Like I've already let this go and moved on. Like, come on, man, like just keep moving forward. But people that end up on the right side of the brain pattern spectrum, they find it very challenging to move on. They're going to ruminate, they're going to replay. They live in a world that's very much like future what if projection and then replaying the past, but are very rarely present, which is the exact opposite of the left side people that we just talked about, where you're almost like so tunnel vision present that other things may not exist temporarily. And I know for me, and this is true of many of the brain patterns that I've mapped of this sort of left side cluster, one of like the most aggressive versions of me that you'll get is if I'm really focused on something and somebody keeps trying to talk to me without taking into consideration that I might be like midway through writing a really important sentence. If I'm not actually doing my work personally and catching that, that's probably the most aggressive version you're going to get of me, where it's like, even if I calm myself down, there's a part of me that wants to rip your head off. Like, what? Just, I'm in the middle of typing. Could you tap on my shoulder? Could you say like, hey babe, when you have a second? Anything like that. And that's going to be really true for those people on the left side, because it's when you're present, your focus is so singular that's why you can be so successful. That's why you can found 6 companies. Same me too. Most people can't do that because they're so split between the future and the past that they don't even know how to be present ever. So that's really what also separates out these two sides. The entrepreneur or high achiever cluster on the far right is an even smaller sliver. So we're talking percentage wise, maybe 2% there, and then maybe till 5 to 7% on the left side, just in terms of mapping the high achievers. So this cluster on the far right side is even smaller, and they have a bit more of a reckless, flippant style where it's kind of, instead of being really highly strategic and pattern recognition and like strategy oriented, they kind of are driven a little bit more of like a why not? Like, let's see how it goes. But it's not always matched with the same level of self-trust and self-efficacy. So they can actually get themselves into situations where they are maybe not going to express it verbally, but in their head, they might come off like they're very self-confident, but we can see on brain pattern mapping where there's a mismatch. And typically when I call that out to that person, they're like, damn, you're good. Because nobody would ever know that about me because they're so good at masking it. So there is this kind of underlying fixation on what others are thinking and feeling about them. Whereas the left side spectrum people really couldn't care less unless it ends up damaging their reputation. It's like, if it's going to impact your money, okay, now I care only so much as to protect like my family or my business or whatever. But a left side spectrum person's not going to get overly focused on caring what others think about them. They won't really see that as a productive exercise. But this cluster on the right, they're gonna care, and they're gonna care a lot, but they're gonna mask it well, so you won't see that on the outside. But it's something that very much drives their behavior and can lead to more start stops and maybe not as strong finishes as the left side spectrum people. Interestingly enough, the more I've mapped the brain patterns of some podcast hosts that aren't also founders, they tend to be the ones on the right hand side. So it's like they're entrepreneurial up to a point, but there is, and I hope this doesn't sound offensive because I know it's not you. You and I are both, we're podcaster founders, so we'd likely be on the left side. But for some of these people that I've mapped on the right side, potentially they're more like influencers that became podcast hosts and can kind of dabble in entrepreneurship, but that's not really where they're absolutely best suited. So that's where I typically see those right side spectrum people pop out. Just because there is more a care of what others think about them that does drive some of their behavior behind the scenes, even if they mask it.
Yeah, I got into the influence realm later just as a supporting the businesses type thing that I have to do.
Yeah.
And, people think sometimes like, oh, you must really like that, because you've got, hundreds of thousands of followers and all these platforms. I hate it, honestly. But
you would, but you're not just confirm that you're definitely on the left side.
So, with founders and elite performers, what would be your non-negotiables around mindset shifts for lasting performance?
Well, number one, work-life balance is not always something that this one's a tough one because I simultaneously don't really believe it's possible. So like on one hand, I really fundamentally don't believe that work-life balance is possible all the time. I think that there are moments or seasons that you can find it naturally and you kind of have to embrace it when it's there. But you can't go into scarcity mode and kind of panic when it leaves because being an entrepreneur requires seasons of working your ass off and burning yourself out and kind of just needing to be in denial about the burnout until you get yourself back into a season of rest. But I think that's kind of on more the macro scale. On the micro scale, I think for people like that, there are certain priorities and non-negotiables you need to have, for example, like in your marriage or if you're a parent. So instead of going for like global work-life balance and trying to achieve these big things, for me, it's like one of my non-negotiables was I have to pick my kids up 3 times per week because for years I didn't get to do that. I never really got to do a lot of the more simple parenting things where it's like, do I like sitting in the pickup line? No. Could I easily trade my time for money and have somebody else do that? Yes. But there's something about taking that time and my kids seeing me in the pickup line and coming to the car that they just know that I care and I'm willing to sacrifice maybe one appointment block because I care about picking them up at school, even though I could afford to have someone else do it. So for me, that's one of them. For me, as soon as I start to notice myself leaning too much on work or starting to kind of maybe try to offload like grocery shopping to Instacart, I will go and oppose that pattern. And I will tell my husband, like, honey, get ready. I'm like making a super gourmet meal tonight. So for me, it's kind of just opposing these things because I can get so pulled into work that I have to really intentionally choose select moments to pour into my family or being a wife or being, being even an employee, like taking care of my employees too, because like those can all get distracting. And I have so many employees that for me, if I notice that there are things that are starting to go too far out of balance or I haven't been pouring into the people that I care about, I will cancel everything on a dime and pour into them so that can kind of keep paying forward for the long haul. So that's definitely one of them. And another one for me is, and this is going to be fairly consistent for this cluster that I've talked about on the left, I have to embrace a do it now mentality, which is ironic because on one hand, it's like we're present and we're focused, but I'm also the kind of person that will just say yes to everything. And I'll be like, yeah, I'll put that in my calendar. And then it's like, all of a sudden I've accidentally committed to 10 things at the same time. And if I didn't do it now and actually put it in my calendar right then, or delegate it to the proper person, even though technically in my mind, like I could do it, I have to force myself to delegate so things don't catch up with me and become chaotic and messy later on. So I think adopting some of those things as an entrepreneur founder is really important because you have a more positively skewed self-deception compared to your other peers. So you have this belief that somehow you'll always figure it out, and you probably will or could, but likely at the expense of something. So you're always going to be borrowing from something. Maybe that's your spouse, maybe that's your kids' time, maybe that's, you showing up late to a client container because you accidentally double or triple booked something. So something's got to give. And instead of just letting that positive self-deception of I'll figure it out take the reins, it's good to focus on the structures and the systems and the delegation that although you could do it, you really shouldn't, and it's not in the best interest of your business or your health in the long run.
That is some good advice. And I'm definitely on the front of, if you believe that you can do it, you'll figure out a way to do it. Mm-hmm. On that, not embracing the work-life balance all the time, mm-hmm. coming at that from a resilience and a sports science background, it is thinking about that in periodization fashion, like to achieve, phenomenal in athletics, you don't try to develop every aspect all at once. There's periods of times and blocks. And so when you approach life with that same concept, like, yes, I would like work-life balance, but you need to think about that in the scope of decades.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be periods where you're going to be able to have more and periods where you're going to have less or very little, as if you choose that life. But hopefully you can set the stage where you can create that over the long haul. And I think that that's a really important thing for people to keep in mind. So I hate to weigh in on, but I believe that that's what you're saying. So I'm just applying.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, that's
science.
great. And I think so often I feel like right now we get the dichotomy. It's either hustle culture or like self-care is everything. Give yourself a break, babe. And there's definitely an in-between that's required to be a successful entrepreneur.
Both of those really turn me off. I absolutely hate the hustle porn, like stuff that is pushed out on social media, and those, business leaders or whatever you want to call them that push that it's just painful. But the other side of that too, like, yeah, if you are that deep in the self-care realm, like that is your life at the end of the day. Like, you're not, what are you going to accomplish?
Like the affirmation manifestation side too, where it's like, you don't have to work for it, just manifest it. Like I find both sides to be complete and utter bullshit.
Absolutely. Yeah. Coming at it right with you on that.
Yeah.
So, I think that was some really good takeaways for the audience. I really like that. Shifting a little bit, I brought up the sports science side of resilience, and everything we're talking about is mental and mindset. But how much of an impact or do you put on, the development of that other side, like the physical strength, the, making sure that you're, from a nutrition, from strength and health, like how much does that weigh into mindset and mental and emotional resilience and managing your thought patterns?
I mean, I think at least in my life, sports and nutrition have always been at the center. Even from the time I was raised, I was on track to be an Olympic athlete when I was young. So sports and nutrition have always been kind of a guiding principle in my life. And I am grateful to my parents for that, because I was very much raised that way. So I didn't have to overcome. I didn't have to work hard to shift my mindset to adopt that. It was always very natural. I think I've probably skewed more toward being like overly militant and rigid about it, where that has been something I've had to really shift as I've gotten older, because I go too far with most things. So I've actually had to learn that it's okay if my work schedule is the way it is for a week, and that if I don't get to the gym for 4 days, instead of getting mad about it or starting to get in fear of like, well, am I going to lose muscle mass? I find myself much more likely to kind of embrace extra snuggles on the couch with my kids and not hold myself to such a high standard, because I'm 40 and I've done that for so long. Again, that's one of the places where I feel like I've tried to find a bit more balance. But for me, nutrition is certainly something that matters. I was diagnosed with lupus when I was 23. So I've had a very strict, healthy diet from 23 to 40. And I think really just this year of my life, actually from microdosing peptides, I'm actually able to eat pretty freely now, and I'm eating far more calories than I ever have before, because I'm not having flares anymore because of peptide therapy. So I'm in kind of this new season of my life where I'm actually living my life a little bit more instead of being so restricted. But at the same time, if you were to compare like my life to an average person that's maybe like trying to adopt a healthy lifestyle, I'm probably healthier than that person. So my chill mode is probably still somebody's strive mode. But I think where I was going with this is, I think fitness and nutrition end up being a reflection of your mindset, but also it's something that, let's say somebody really kind of pushes into that, you can actually learn how to shift your mindset by using physical means. So either way, it's kind of building habits. So I think it's either a natural reflection of who you are and how you see the world, like it is with me, where I didn't have to be taught to go hard. I do what I do and everything that I do. So I actually had to learn to oppose my pattern and kind of pull back on that a little bit to be more healthy. But for some people that aren't naturally very structured, don't know how to push themselves, they're trying to build resilience, pushing really hard into a fitness or workout protocol can actually help build the skills to reinforce that which they're missing, to kind of blend the two back together. But I think in my world, it's ended up being more a reflection of my internal state that is just another area where I have to oppose the pattern and learn to chill sometimes.
And picking up that theme on opposing the pattern again, I was going to point that out earlier to the audience. I'm sure that they're hearing that, but I really find that interesting of like, hey, I really am feeling anxious about not getting the gym. I want to go there. And then leaning into that, like, okay, I need to go the opposite. Instead of going there, I'm going to go spend some time doing the opposite and dive into that. That is a really interesting thought process and something I think worth trying for people, and certainly myself, and I'm going to give that some serious consideration.
It's something I go into really in depth in my book. So based on where you come out on the brain pattern map, everyone has, like we mentioned, your own very specific flavor of self-deception, but there are also rebellion zones that you should be calling yourself into with a very specific strategy, because there are specific pattern oppositions that will help you heal and will help you build more dynamic range and more resilience. So an example would be, let's say we have somebody who's naturally a bit more lazy and typically makes excuses for why they don't want to go to the gym. That's obviously a person that we need to combat or show the brain the error in its thinking to get them to go to the gym. So their pattern opposition is to go instead of not to go. Whereas mine is like, have to go to the gym, won't be happy unless I work out. So for me, it's like I have to do the opposite. I have to prove to myself I can be happy and present and peaceful sitting on the couch doing absolutely nothing at all. So depending on where you are on the brain pattern spectrum, the book will break down exactly where your rebellion zones are across all areas. So like work, family, career, self-care, so that you can figure out where you have these opportunities to grow. Because I think growth is the name of the game. And I think, we touched on this a little bit. Most people, if left to their own devices of their brain pattern, they tend to get their ruts deeper and they stagnate. And obviously that's not going to happen. The further out on either side you are, that's much less likely to happen because you have a higher risk tolerance and you get bored more easily. If you're toward the center of the spectrum, I call that the circle of complacency in the book. Those people tend to have very low desire to go into risk. So they live very mundane, monotonous, repetitive lives that would probably drive the rest of us insane. Those are typically the people that we need to kind of light a fire under their ass and teach them how to take more calculated risk, how to believe in themselves more, and to, lovingly stir the pot a bit.
Love it. So off of that, when it comes to your own personal definition of resilience, what is that and how has it evolved through the years?
I think childhood environments are going to create or not create resilience naturally. And of course, I'm sure there are people that have found their way to you or me that are aware that they are not emotionally or physically resilient. And they know that that's a deficit in an area that they have to improve to be able to enjoy your life. Because in all of the 12 years of scanning brain pattern mapping and doing the data science, the people that report the best quality of life have the highest levels of self-efficacy, emotional resilience, and self-trust. So effectively, no matter what situation you put them into, they believe they're going to figure it out and that they have the grit required to sustain it and to get to the end. As soon as somebody gives away their agency or looks to others to solve problems, or they lack either the ability to do it themselves, or they don't trust what their brain is telling them about what to do or what steps to take, typically the next step there is to feel like life is futile. And that's where you start to skew the other way toward more suicidal ideation sort of presentations and depression. So naturally, my childhood environment very much created emotional resilience and grit because I had to navigate my mom and my dad every day. But what's interesting is that in childhood environments that are very loving and consistent and committed and all those things where the parents are really trying to go above and beyond for their kids, and they may even go too far and in fact enable the kids or create dependency, those are actually the worst reported outcomes that I've seen over 12 years. So to me, resilience is the ability to believe in yourself and sustain effort even when it feels like the odds are stacked up against you, so that you can keep going. So in other words, I think commitment has to precede resilience. And when you're parented with kind of the white picket fence and you're overly cared for and things are too easy, you don't learn to commit and go after goals, because you've essentially become dependent on your parents or some sort of other to rescue you. So to me, resilience is a combo of commitment and grit and self-trust.
The big challenge there is, how do you navigate that as a parent, right? And I grew up homeless in the wilderness and experienced every type of trauma imaginable, you know.
You're definitely on the left side of the coin.
And so, you know, it was pretty wild. Now, you know, raising my kids, I want to make sure that, you know, obviously there's no risk of them being in any sort of environment like that, but I want to make sure that I ride that balance of, you know, care and protection, and at the same time allowing them to fail, to you know, have some safety guardrails, but manage that, because man, it is scary seeing what happens with the helicopter parenting to the extreme. And I want to get on a soapbox, but finding that line is like, there's no perfect, I guess. So that's, you can't go.
So we have a whole module on this in Break Method that I think is really important. And it's one of the sections of the program where people are like just pouring in feedback when they get there, and they're like, oh my God, this is everything. So I call them the Break Method keystones of parenting. And essentially the most important thing is age appropriate truth. When you are trying to be as honest as you can be with your kids, but also making sure that you're giving them only that which they can truly receive through their age appropriate lens, you're naturally going to agitate and scare them a little bit, right? Because you're not holding back, you're not giving them some sort of like alternate story. You know, if let's say like, you know, their favorite uncle dies, you're not like, oh, well, I think they're on vacation, right? We're just like trying to dodge the question altogether. So an example of this that I typically give is using, let's say that an uncle committed suicide and it was your kid's favorite uncle. If the kid's like, hey, where's Uncle Tommy? You're not going to be like, well, sit down. Uncle Tommy took a gun and Uncle Tommy blew his, you're not going to do that, right? That's not age appropriate. That's over the top. But you're also not going to make up some scenario about how Tommy's on a prolonged vacation just because you don't want to deal with it. So this is a perfect opportunity to help uncover some really challenging topics in the world, but again, strive for honesty. And even if it's going to hurt a little bit, or it's going to segue into more or deeper existential questions, that's a great opportunity to give the right amount of agitation to your child so that they don't think that the world is all rainbows and butterflies, and that pain happens. People are hurting. People can hurt themselves. People can get hurt. You don't want to hide this from your kids, because that's part of what actually starts to ratchet up situational awareness, which is actually quite important. And when you buffer and helicopter everything, your kids don't learn to be situationally aware. So that age appropriate truth is the most important one. After that, we have to make sure that you're teaching your kids how to accurately self-measure. So convincing your kid that their effort on the soccer field, for example, was great because you love your kid so much, instead of being like, I think here's what I see. Do you want to know the truth? When XYZ happened, I think you could have done this. I think you slacked a little bit on training this week. What can I do to support you so we can work harder next week, right? That's honest. Blowing smoke up your kid just because you don't want to hurt their feelings because they think they did really good in the game and you're like, well, I have a different opinion. So helping them learn how to accurately self-measure helps them understand, as long as it's communicated in a respectful and strategic way, like, how do I show up in the world? And is my self-concept not matching my parents'? If not, why is that? You know, I got myself to a place where my dad was very hard on me. And this one day I was positive that I was handing my dad an A paper and that he was going to read it and be like, oh my God, it's the best thing you've ever written. My dad marked the shit out of it and just tore it to shreds. But this is after years of him doing that. And it was a pivotal moment for me because I looked at it and I was like, this is a good opportunity. Do I think my dad was just looking to pick things apart just because that's how he knows how to parent me? Yeah. do I still think this is an A paper despite all the negative feedback my dad gave me? And I'm like, yeah, I do. I'm going to roll the dice. I'm going to say, F off. I'm going to turn this paper in anyways. I think at this point I was like 15 or 16. And guess what? It was an A. But that was still an important learning lesson for me, because I was able to kind of get this pushback and still at a certain point be like, am I going to trust myself or am I going to trust this outside source? Because I had already learned how to accurately self-measure. And I kind of, at that point, had already developed a more objective sense of right and wrong and good effort from poor effort, because I could hold myself to that standard. So that's one of the other things you want to build for your kid, is being able to honestly reflect what you're seeing. Another example of this, because I think this can get started actually very early on in toddlerhood. I watched my youngest daughter, Harley, play soccer last year, and she came back from a game and I was like, so did you score any goals? Because I wasn't there the whole time. She's like, yeah, I scored 5 goals. And I look at my husband, who was the coach. I'm like, 5 goals? That sounds like nonsense. I'm like, did Harley really score 5 goals? He's like, no, I don't think any of the kids even knew how to make it to the net. So this was learning opportunity, because I went over to Harley and was able to say to her, like, hey, Dad's your coach, right? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, so Daddy would have been watching the game? Yeah. Daddy, when I asked him, he said you didn't score any goals. And all of a sudden you see this look on her face and I'm like, does it feel like it's only fun to play soccer if you can like win and score goals? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, are you maybe a little embarrassed that you didn't score any goals? But I used it as an opportunity to help her see that she actually was creating a false narrative to try to get attention. So instead of shaming her and being like, why would you lie to me? Why would you make that up? I was helping her put the puzzle pieces together for her to see that she doesn't have to make something up to get my love, and that I loved watching her in the game even without scoring goals. But I wasn't just going to get through that conversation while kind of buying into her false narrative, because then that's something that she would keep perpetuating, because kids don't really outgrow that. So that's just another example of kind of the accurate self-measurement. But then to pair with that, I think spontaneous celebration of your child is incredibly important. So also just randomly going up to your kid and just being like, I just love you for no reason at all. You're just awesome. I love you so much. Because then that helps kind of balance out like the measurement performance aspect, which I do think has to be front loaded, but the spontaneous celebration of like, I just love you for you, and this has nothing to do with anything, I just wanted to give you a hug, that kind of helps balance the pieces out. And then really the last one is bolstering self-efficacy, letting your child struggle instead of solving the problem, asking them the right questions for them to learn how to solve it on their own, and not being so quick to step in and buffer things, because kids need to struggle, and they need to learn how to struggle at those younger age ranges when the stakes aren't so high. Because struggling as a 20-year-old is not a good look. Struggling as a 10-year-old, like, okay, we can navigate the social sanctions of that, but that doesn't go well when you're trying to figure that out at 20 and 30 and even 40.
I love what you're saying there. And I have to point out how many times you pointed to recognition for effort, not necessarily what the accomplishment was. So that is just, I want to point that out, because you did that probably, I think, 5 times within the course of that. So,
but also being honest about that. I think the key is less about like, good job, and more honest feedback about the quality of the effort rather than just like the number that you put on the board, for example.
Yes, exactly. So I want to take a little bit of tangent before we wrap up. What peptides are you seeing success with lupus around?
So I have been microdosing Tirzepatide mixed with B12, and I started about 3.5 months ago. And 3.5 months ago, I was honestly at my wit's end. I have mast cell activation syndrome. I was having MCAS flares. I'd just gotten diagnosed with Hashimoto's. I was working out, eating right, doing all the things, and I just continued to get more and more inflamed. And I finally was like, I'd been doing the research for so long, and finally I was just like, all right, I'm just going to do it. I've historically been fairly anti-big pharma my whole life, so the idea of injecting anything was such a stumbling block for me that it took me probably longer to just do it. But once I did, I'm now 3.5 months in. I've lost almost 30 pounds of pretty much just all inflammation. And I can eat pretty much anything I want now. I'm no longer reacting to anything. I don't have migraines anymore. My feminine cycles are all normalized. Everything. I literally feel like I'm back to where I was when I was 20. And the best part for me is really that I don't have to be as restrictive with food anymore, because before it was literally like playing Russian roulette with any food, I would potentially have a flare reaction to it. And now I can wake up in the morning and I can have a piece of like gluten-free sourdough bread, which I don't think I had for probably like 18 years, with some eggs. And I can, like little things I can do without thinking about it and fearing that it's going to put me into a flare for weeks on end. So all my symptoms are in complete remission. I've lost about 30 pounds. I'm down, I think, 7% body fat from where I started. Arguably, I think probably my body water was really high because I think my like fluid retention was completely out of whack. And then a little while ago, I also added in BPC 157 and TB 500. And then I'm just starting to take the GHKCU copper peptide as well for my skin. And my husband he like does so many peptides too. So I know for sure he's on the Wolverine stack. He's injecting all the time. I only inject once a week for the microdose of the Tirzepatide, and then the BPC is roughly like every other day for an 8-week cycle. But it's completely changed my life. I am such a strong proponent of it. And I have a group now of probably about 200 people that have started to do it since I've been sharing my podcast. And so many of them with years-long chronic conditions, autoimmune disease, most of which now their symptoms are totally in remission. So I think, one of my target areas that I keep trying to share my story with are the people that have been struggling with autoimmune issues, because I think it's so known for weight loss that people get kind of deceived and like they can't think about the other actions that it would have on the mechanisms that are responsible for autoimmune disease. But the effects on autoimmune disease are profound, especially for MCAS, Hashimoto's, and lupus. It's incredible.
So yeah, thank you for sharing that. By the way, I have all those in stock for our listeners.
Amazing.
The GHK, the BPC, and TB is a blend called Clo, which is really tremendous for healing and, as Bizzie mentioned, for hair and skin. But the GHK has some really interesting studies around cognitive and neurology as well. So big impact there. If you want to take it even further from an inflammation standpoint, adding the Clo blend, which is that same blend, plus KPV, which is a powerful anti-inflammatory, also drives into the gut. Super powerful.
Is KPV in the Wolverine? I feel like KPV is probably in my husband's Wolverine. I think
there's a lot of different Wolverine stacks. So I've been in the peptide space for about 20 years. I did a lot of these. Those programs I developed like 15 years ago when I didn't. This was all kind of, nobody talked about it because it was like steroids, But the dual agonist with the Tirzepatide, and then there's the triple agonist, which I'm a huge fan of.
Is that the Retatrutide one?
Yes, exactly. Are really, really tremendous. And people don't realize, so you mentioned, yes, it's going to have, again, a massive anti-inflammatory impact. Those products were originally developed for neuroinflammation, and during the studies is when they found that they were having weight loss as a side effect. And now we have a weight loss drug, and people don't realize these other benefits. Now, in addition to the neuroinflammation, you also have, as you're noting, a big control of both estrogen and testosterone. So, and when we get into like pre and postmenopausal as well, huge impacts, PCOS, like massive impacts for these things. So, but yeah, the autoimmune is absolutely like phenomenal what we can do with controlling that. Yeah, if you ever want to reach out, I'm just covering the space stuff with your experiences for the audience.
Yeah, I would love to have you on my podcast. I'll have you on my podcast to go deep on the peptide science, because I think people really misunderstand what the initial purpose of them was. And I think now, because of the whole like Ozempic thing, people just really have their guard up. And I have some theories on what I think is really going on, because I think
many people, the problem is that they're pushing this really high dosing protocol and always pushing everybody up to this certain amount. And you can elicit these benefits with a fraction of the starting dose and just staying there. Like you don't need to go crazy. You don't need to have your GI like shutting down. You don't need to have your appetite crust. Like shutting down a little bit of food noise can be really beneficial. But there's a big difference between getting amazing impact on your body as a whole and then choosing a few different peptides like you're doing versus taking that one and just like going to mass, push that up just to push somebody down to a 500 calorie a day diet. Like people go, oh, you're going to lose muscle. Well, yeah. You take a sedentary person, you put them on a 500 calorie a day diet. What do you think's going to happen? The muscle is going to waste, whether you're taking Ozempic or not.
Yeah. I keep trying to explain to people, just based on my journey, in the first maybe 4 to 6 weeks, I definitely noticed that it felt more challenging to eat. I really didn't have much of an appetite. But by probably the end of month 2, beginning of month 3, I had my totally normal appetite back. And now I'm eating way more calories than I was before. So I historically have been kind of a 1,200 to 1,600 calories a day person. Just it's what I naturally like to eat. I'm well over 2,000 right now, and I feel great. And I'm like, my lean muscle mass is back intact, and my life is more normal now than it was before. And I think some people immediately hear this and they're like, oh, I'm going to lose my appetite. My muscle's going to go away. Like, I'm probably the fittest I've ever been, and I'm eating way more calories than I've ever eaten.
Exactly.
So you just have to get through the adjustment period, and the first 2 months, it had its ups and downs, but from month 3 on, I've been on top of the world.
Awesome. So, where can people find you? Where can they find your book? What else do we need to pass along to our audience?
So you can head to bizzie.gold to find out about my book, how to work with me, all of that. And then if you wanted to learn about brain pattern mapping, you can go to Break Method, or there's, of course, links for it on my Instagram.
All right. I am going to check this out myself after our discussion. I was looking into it, but I thought I'd wait till the podcast. I was really interested when I saw it.
Link so that I can do your session myself. So okay. I'll send you my personal link so that I can do it with you.
All right.